Hello and welcome to the Colts Cover-2 Podcast. We are back. We are back after our long summer away. Nate and I are back, and we are out at Colts training camp. This is coming to you from the end of the first day of practice. You may hear some golf carts and other stuff going through as we do the pod. We're just doing it out of practice. So, but we're back at Grand Park, familiar place, and I think, Nate, one of the things that sticks out to most people is how much of a lack of a giant storyline there is so far.
Yeah, very, very different than a year ago at this time when on report day we weren't quite sure it was going to come out. And then by 4 p.m. we find out Jonathan Taylor's on the PUP list, and we were kind of off the rails as far as that situation goes. And then, it was Anthony Richardson was a big storyline last year. He is this year, but in a more normal way, more football way. He's out there on the field. He's in. Of course, we have to monitor and see as things go. There's always going to be a risk with him, but as of right now, we get to just talk about this team coming together to get better as a football team, build identities on both sides of the ball, try and develop enough to become what they believe is a playoff team. And it feels just kind of very stable and professional and like they're through a lot of the stuff that at times has dragged this franchise down with the quarterback carousel and the contract dispute last year and on. And so we'll see where it goes from here. But they feel like they're the most normal, stable place that they've been in since I've gotten here. And you just you feel the confidence that comes from that when you talk to players and coaches, and everything here just has a feel of like it's just time to go to work. That's Shane Steichen's identity is. His personality is kind of becoming the identity of this team, and it's gotten them in a much more hopeful place than they were even just 1 year ago.
Yeah, Richardson, there was that hiccup in the middle of the summer and where he didn't throw in the last day of mandatory minicamp. And I know that caught a lot of people's attention. It kind of caught my attention just because they hadn't said that they were expecting to have any of that happen. My big takeaway from the first 2 days is that the Colts message on that is basically, that's over, move past it, don't worry about it. It seems like for something that I came into the week thinking this is going to be a big talking point. It really hasn't been. It's pretty much that's over, move on.
Yeah, which is what they said at the time, but we've seen teams across sports downplay injuries, and then they're a much bigger deal. And here in Indianapolis, like, people are on edge when they hear about shoulders and quarterbacks, and just some of the body language Anthony had. He was just so frustrated by just that situation. But everything that's happened since and everything they're saying now just backs up what they said at that time, which is that they were being extra, extra, extra cautious. And Chris Ballard had kind of laid that out earlier in the offseason. That's why I was trying not to be too alarmed is he had kind of said, having gone through this with Andrew Luck and not maybe being cautious enough at certain moments back then, he is more going to overdo it and be overly cautious at moments with this one. And so that was a moment of that. But at the same time, they also knew that, he's got to get there's a certain amount of work that Anthony's going to have to get in. It's like, and they don't want to live in their fears and just treat it with kid gloves. So it was more get through that part of the offseason that wasn't super important to where we are now, which is these practices are a lot more important, and they're about to get more important when he's out there in his full contact, first time for him since the injury. We get out here in joint practices, and if he plays some in the preseason, we're about to get back to real football. And so this was the time of year when he needed to be fully through that. And again, we still have to see it play out. We've seen one practice. I want to see him, they're not going to practice tomorrow, so it'll be a little bit till we see him do back-to-back days type of thing. And then when we see contact come in, but certainly the messaging, the vibes, the body language, which I think is always very, very telling with Chris Ballard and Anthony Richardson, it's all in a pretty good place right now. And it doesn't mean that the way I feel about this is it doesn't mean that injury concerns are gone. In fact, they'll always be there for the rest of his career, just because he's that type of running quarterback, and that's just a little bit what they signed up for. But I think what's encouraging is it feels like we're past that injury, specific one that happened against the Titans. We're past the rehab in just about every way, and we're on to kind of building the type of offense they want to build and finding a way to not live to have learned lessons from that in terms of, how much they emphasize to him to slide, to not seek out contact, but also to not live in their fears. And I thought it was just telling that Shane Steichen today, he made he was kind of forward in saying that they're going to run like crazy and they're going to run Anthony as much as they need to run him. And he made an analogy that like, it's like, are you going to ask Steph Curry to stop shooting 3-pointers? Well, no, not when that's his superpower. And this is Anthony's superpower. They're going to find a way to, now that they're through all that previous injury with the shoulder, they're going to get back to building that part of his game. And I think that's an encouraging message. It doesn't mean that it's, you're going to hold your breath at moments. That's just the nature of the game that they're playing here. But to really get into the upside of Anthony Richardson, they have to tap into that. And you just saw little flashes today, even though it's, they can't hit the quarterback and all that. You saw some of the explosive flashes when he starts moving with the ball in his hands when he's throwing. And you just see like he moves at a different level than just about any other quarterback you're going to find. And it's just going to be exciting to kind of watch how Shane Steichen, a very, very talented play caller, creative mind, can tap into that and continue to build it and not just solely be afraid of what the next hit might bring.
One of the things that sticks out to me, and I was thinking about it, if you've seen anything on social media from a video of Richardson throwing, I think Nate put some up. I did in individuals. We're not allowed to shoot 7-on-7 or team period. For those of you who don't know, team period essentially means 11-on-11. But Richardson had quite a few misses in the individual. Once he got back to playing football, though, he was 4 of 5 in 11-on-11. He was 2 of 5 in 7-on-7. Although I think sometimes with 7-on-7, we've seen him take longer than he does in the actual 11-on-11. I don't know. That's something else I'm going to be watching. We're still learning him a little bit as a quarterback. But one of the things that I'm kind of thinking through is it just better for him when it's all moving pretty quickly? Thinking back to like Ed Dodd said when he drafted him, or after they drafted him, that one of the things he had to have answered was these plays where you're in the pocket and you're sitting there and you've got time, and then there's these misses. Why do those happen? It's just one practice. You don't want to take too. I let's put it this way. I wrote this down in my notebook as something to kind of like monitor going forward. Just, is that the difference? Is the difference that when they've got him doing a bunch of other stuff, faking a handoff, play action, RPO, all that stuff, the lack of time, he's pretty accurate. And then maybe there's more misses in times when it's more of a set throw. I don't know. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the case. I'm just saying that over the course of the summer, this first practice, it was something that I wrote down. It's like, maybe that's something to keep track of. And maybe that's something the Colts will keep track of and go, hey, it seems like he's working. It seems like it's better for him when he's doing a lot of stuff and processing really quickly.
Well, that's what I thought about his play last year. And granted, small samples, so we don't know the full book on him. It's only 84 attempts across 4 games. But if you think back to how he played last year, the overall passing numbers, they got a lot better in like the later games than the early ones. And I think about how he played like the Jaguars game, his first debut. He was playing mistake free, but it felt a little overthought. It felt a little robotic. It felt like he was trying to just nail all these little mechanical points. And sometimes when he drops back and in those type of settings, or that game, and I've noticed this in some practices, you can almost hear him counting the steps out like in his head. And when it's a little too much thinking like that, that's when it does seem like he isn't at his best. He's not his most accurate. And I've seen that in like individuals today. He was doing, he felt he had that feel to him, and then he was not throwing very well. And it just really changes when he gets in these situations where like a play's got to be made and he's got to go be that guy. And when he taps into that confidence, when he thinks of himself as like, this is my superpower and this is where I'm at home, is using my legs and throwing on the move. And so then you think back to last year, what flipped it? Well, the Rams game, and not just that entire game, it's when they went down 23-0. And it was like they just had to throw out kind of the game script and some of the finer points they'd been hammering in on him. And it's like, dude, we need plays. We need explosive plays out here. And he just started playing incredibly free, even in some very difficult moments with Aaron Donald breathing down his neck and getting into his lap. And like, but he was gone from this just play mistake free, just execute only this, A to B first read type thing. And that's when he was, making some of those incredible plays that led them back to get into overtime. And the unfortunate thing with the injury is I wanted to see him build on that. I felt like we were just there, and that was a big turning point of like, we've got that free flowing, explosive player who's kind of combining all of these great traits, while also in the process of that, you can feel a little bit of the payoff of the work on his accuracy and some, just learning the offense. So that's what I'm curious to see here, is that it makes sense that if that's the last thing we saw out of him, then he comes back this year, and it was kind of the same thing. It started out today very robotic, and it felt like he was thinking too much. And then when he got a little bit out of that and some of getting outside the pocket in the red zone, you saw the things that they drafted him for. So that'll be kind of the balance, because he's so young. He doesn't, we're asking him to tap into this part of him that hasn't really formed itself in an NFL way yet, but it's going to be fun to watch that play out. And there's a reason to be excited about it, even though I think examples like today show you like there's the accuracy thing is still an ongoing conversation. It isn't just an all or nothing. He's over, now he's accurate, or now he's not, or he's not accurate. It's like he's still kind of a rookie in many aspects, and we're still going to see rookie moments out of him. And I think that's okay. It's more like, how does he build on it? And, can he grow even within a game where you're robotic that first script maybe, and then you tap into that high gear. And that's what's kind of fascinating about him, is something special is in there. You don't know when it's going to come out, but it tends to come out, and it came out today, much like it came out in that Rams game last year.
I think the best throw we've seen from we saw it probably all off season today that we've seen all off season happen today, and it was the slant to Alec Pierce, because he had to fit in a window. The timing was very quick. It was contested. It was also a kind of a win for Alec Pierce in that he beat Juju Brents on a slant, which is the kind of the thing that he needs to do better, is winning on some of those kinds of routes. But it was closing down. It was a tight window. It was contested. That was the play I kind of starred in my notebook as, okay, this is the kind of thing they're going to need from him. There's a lot of stuff that I think there's going to be a lot of stuff that they do that gives him easy throws. Stuff where he doesn't have to thread the needle. I think that's one of Shane Steichen's gifts, along with Jim Bob Cooter. But I also think that they're at some point they're going to need him to make the kind of throw he made to Pierce today, and he did on that one. The faster, I will say this, the other thing I noticed today that I wrote down was the faster the ball comes out of his hands, the better it seems to be. Because his one miss in 11 on 11 today was a play where he didn't know where to go right away, held the ball, and it was exacerbated by him kind of stumbling as he threw the ball, but he fired low to A.D. Mitchell on his only incompletion of 11 on 11.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation, because it brings me back to something Shane Steichen shared at the owners' meetings. One of his favorite plays from Anthony is one that you'd have to be Shane for this to be one of your favorite plays, because it was kind of mundane. But it was a play against the Titans when he sort of saw a mismatch based on pre-snap jet motion with Josh Downs and knew it was going to be open, and just pretty much abandoned the other design of the play and just threw that right early and in stride. It was like perfectly accurate, perfectly delivered. And that was the kind of thing that tapped into his confidence of like, I know this is going to be open. I know what kind of throw I need to make. And there are other times where, like, if he's holding the ball too long, but he's not moving, if he's kind of like, I got to stand here to make the throw, at some point, it's almost like he's like, well, enough time's passed. I just got to throw it. And you don't really have the confidence playing into his accuracy and building the accuracy the way that you want to see. Now, I do think that like part of his game is going to be he's going to be a guy who's going to hold the ball, and he should at times. Like when you can dodge pressure in the pocket and reset the way he can, where you can turn a drop back into a scramble that turns into a run for 25 yards at 4.4 speed. That's going to be part of his game. So that's going to be kind of the balance of like how do the Colts get him to throw confident and make those decisions when they're there versus not force a throw, a bad decision, and get something positive and explosive out of holding the ball. I think the more he holds the ball and moves his body toward the line of scrimmage, whether he's throwing or running it, that's good. When he holds the ball super long just to throw flat-footed, that's when I think you see some of those accuracy and ball placement issues come up, because it's almost like there's a voice in his head that's not his saying, come on, you got to throw it now. And the voice they need ultimately at the end of the day in his head is like his own, like, hey, you've got this, and like tap into exactly who you are and hit that ceiling.
It's tough here. You get the way training camp opens, you get a flood of information, and then you want to have these big. That's why I keep saying like it's something I've written down. It's like just to pay attention to, because we only saw 15 plays of 11 on 11 today. They're not in full pads. You're trying not to get too locked into anything in terms of opinions at this point. But I mean, one of the things that Shane Steichen talked about today was they're going to run him. They should run him, and we saw it on the practice field. The first 11 on 11 play of camp was a design run for Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, that was interesting because that's the ongoing conversation of how do you keep that injury from happening again? The number one thing. We often frame it this way: the number one thing for them is to keep Anthony Richardson healthy. Well, I honestly think that's number two. Number one is to get him to his ceiling, which is a level of availability, playing enough to get to that ceiling. But it's not going to work if they just keep him on the field, but we never get to a special level. Like they cannot turn this kid into just a 3-step drop quarterback or the entire run game to just be Jonathan Taylor, because they're not going to tap into the superhero abilities of him if they do that. And also, just in that way, if every carry is going to go to Jonathan Taylor, the odds are he's going to get hurt, and all of a sudden you're dropping from him to Trey Sermon. And for them to really hit the thing that's going to separate this Colts team, if they can hit it from almost any other team in the league, is the high upside, explosive upside they can get in the run game between Anthony Richardson, Jonathan Taylor, behind this offensive line with Shane Steichen's creative designs. And they pretty much promised that they pretty much said, like, yeah, we feel the same way. We know that is like that's our meal ticket. That's going to be, you look across the AFC, like you've got to be special in some kind of way offensively to have a chance with teams like the Chiefs and Bengals and Bills, who all have that. And the Colts are not going to build, the Bengals style of offense where, if Anthony Richardson has to be Joe Burrow and, Michael Pittman Jr. has to be Jamar Chase, they're not going to ever break through that way. But their version of it is this 2-4-4 athletes in the backfield who can just rip it off at any point. And I think ideally, Jonathan Taylor's going to have a ton more carries than Anthony Richardson. That's why they paid him such a high rate. I mean, he's done it once a couple seasons ago, been that bell cow, and still Anthony's health is the most important thing for any player in this offense. So ideally, you're using Anthony a lot of times as sort of that threat, that not a decoy, but like him in the backfield is like gives you like a free blocker because the defense has to account for it. But to really hit on that, he's got to keep the ball sometimes too. And when Taylor's rolling and Taylor is, if he can hit his ceiling, be that guy who rips off some of the longest gains in the NFL and could win the rushing title like 2 years ago, defenses are going to converge on him in certain moments. And that's when Anthony's got to be willing to take it and be that explosive athlete in his own right. And it's going to be an interesting balance because there are, certain points they're going to drill in on him of, don't overdo it. Like, step out of bounds when there's nothing really there, or slide or that stuff. But that's not going to be all of it. I mean, there's going to be times in the red zone when, or on third down, when he's not going to be able to slide. I do not want to see him taking the Gardner Minshew playbook of falling a yard short of the first down. Like, I want to see Anthony. There's going to be times when he needs to, lower his shoulder and run over somebody. Like, at some point, they have to build the fully rounded player here, just not overdo it. And so that's where, like, I think that's why I was so big on why they should sign Taylor, be that team that pays the running back. Because number one is, I think he is that cut above special type of running back you can't replace with an average, with a replaceable guy. But the other thing is that what that's going to do for Anthony Richardson, of like, you turn his rushing upside into something that doesn't have to always be the one carrying the ball. It's like Anthony's explosive upside is going to make it even easier on Jonathan Taylor. I'm just fascinated to see how those two play off each other, because they never matched up last year. It was like a couple plays, the only time we saw them, and that was probably the worst version of Jonathan Taylor we'll ever see. The one in the Titans game when he had sat out for so long. The one we saw at the final game against the Texans, which almost single-handedly carried them into the playoffs and division title. You mix that with the Anthony we saw against the Rams. A lot has to happen here, but you can see why that could be really, really exciting, and something that, as we've talked about, it's really hard to find a comp for that in terms of younger, athletic players at quarterback and running back playing together. You would have to go to like Cam Newton and Christian McCaffrey, but it was an older Cam who was running less. Like, it's very hard to find a comp for this, and there's risk of or challenge of how do you get on the field, how do you keep them on the field, how do you run them a lot and not lose them. But for as much as it's out there, I think it has the potential to be pretty lethal and sometimes unstoppable.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of all wanted to see two guys that dynamic put together in the same offense. I mean, just to the point of things that can open up for Taylor. When Richardson was on the field last year, Zach Moss was about a yard better in terms of yards per carry with Richardson than he was with Minshew. So there's so many questions about what this team could look like. The hard part is that we've had him for a year now. And so some of what we're saying here at the beginning is stuff that we've said all along, because we haven't seen them play together. We haven't seen him since the Tennessee game. I think the other thing I'm interested to see is how he develops or how he looks as a passer in this camp. And one of the things I've been kicking around is just, what do they do, or what is he? Who does he link up with? How do they use people? I think today, Michael Pittman had at least 2 catches. I think Downs had 2 catches. Pierce had a catch. There was 1 target for Mitchell in 20 plays we saw. We can get into this now. A team that's going to run this much, I think some of the expectations for the receivers are a little overblown at this point, just in terms of volume, how much they're going to catch. If this team runs the ball as much as it seems like they're going to, as much as Shane Steichen is hinting that they're going to, like the receiver's impact is going to have to be in big plays more than it's going to be in, the 3 guys having 60 plus catches. It seems tough for that to happen if you're going to run the ball as much as I think they're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, you look at last year, and they had 2 big time receivers in production, and Pittman and Josh Downs. Pittman went for like 1,100 yards, Josh Downs 700 some, and then not a lot else after that. And of course, some of that was a limited backup quarterback, but you're going to replace that limited backup quarterback with one who's going to run a lot, and you're going to introduce Jonathan Taylor, the full-time version, and you're going to make use of that. And then what you're going to introduce is, they hope, a tight end like Jelani Woods who can be that sort of seam stretcher, clear number 1 option. Again, he has to stay healthy for this to work, but it's good vibes so far. He did not come into training camp with any kind of concerns that I've heard of, and he was moving around well today and has to get back into this. But like that, I think that's gone underrated, is the fact that like Shane really cobbled together a tight end room last year without Jelani Woods. Uh, just different injuries in and out, but they had more than 800 yards. That was they worked on RPO. They were a big part of a lot of those trick plays. But like he had to sort of generate that because they didn't have that standout guy. Jelani Woods can be that. He was. It's it's easy. It just feels like it's gotten forgotten with him because he missed a year. But this is a guy who stepped in and I mean he averaged 12.5 yards a catch and turned 65% of his catches as a rookie into first downs. And it felt really raw then. And it's one of the most athletic athletes at the tight end position the NFL Combine has ever seen. So you add that into the mix. And then, like we said last year, I mean, it was like they had 3 receivers and then nothing behind them. Well, now that's 4 guys with AD Mitchell. Uh, yeah, it's there's only so much that's going to go around, and Pittman's going to garner a certain amount just because he is that established security blanket guy who is more versatile than like a Alec Pierce or AD Mitchell at this stage. So guys like Pearson and Mitchell, yeah, they have to capitalize on the moments they do get, be explosive and efficient, but also like I was asking AD Mitchell today, he pretty much said like he doesn't have any choice but to try to become an elite blocker because that's what this role is going to be this year. And it's a good problem to have, I guess. In theory, again, a lot of this stuff's theoretical. Can they stay out there? Can this come together? Um, but it also lends to the fact that this team is not going to be interested in trading for any of the receivers out there. I'm sorry to let some people down if they're excited for the fact that Brandon Ayuk or CeeDee Lamb are on the trade block. It doesn't feel like Chris Ballard moved anyway, even if they really needed it. Like it felt like maybe a year or two ago they did, but especially now, even if they were to somehow find a price they liked on Brandon Ayuk, you're going to bring in any guy that would come in here who's not Michael Pittman and has an expectation for like a huge role as a receiver in production isn't going to get it. It's just other things would have to go wrong for a receiver other than Pittman to have a huge lion's share of this passing game. The ideal the offense they're going to build is Pittman's going to have a big amount, and then it's going to really be spread out. It's just about how explosive and efficient can the rest of those guys be.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that people were thinking about. I'm still like I didn't really think of the Colts as a big Brandon Ayuk destination anyway. You invested a second round pick in N.I. Mitchell. You've already paid Michael Pittman a huge price. It just doesn't seem like it fits their plan. So I don't know if people have. I don't know. I'd be curious to find out if people are talking about that. It like didn't even when the trade request came across. I didn't even like think, oh, that's what the kind of thing that people are going to be talking about. I mean, maybe that's naive since people talk about every player that becomes available. Jelani Woods is interesting. I really think after like listening to Chris Ballard and watching the first practice and listening to everything over the offseason, like as talented as he is, he really does have to catch up. There were a bunch of tight ends that worked with the first team today, and he wasn't one of them. He's got to catch up with this. This is such a make or break year for him. If he can realize his potential, like he gives them such an explosive option. But if he doesn't, like you think about, explosive plays, but not a lot of catches as a rookie, a lost second season, like you're talking about, like, does he like he might have to realize his full role to justify his third round pick at this point. It's an interesting spot he's in. I think it's maybe underrated, the stakes that are there for Jelani Woods this season.
Yeah, because you even think to other tight ends who kind of had his profile of like great athlete, but they're a rookie and that's such a learning curve at that position. Some of those other guys had a little bit more leeway, like a David Njoku is a guy that comes to mind because they were first round picks. They had the 5th-year option. Like if this year doesn't come together for Jelani Woods, he's in a contract year and they're probably moving on to something. or at least they're exploring other options. It would be hard to put your eggs in the basket of a guy who had the profile you described, where 1/3 of his seasons he wasn't even there for, and then if he didn't produce in the other two that much, that's problematic. It's interesting though because it's also a huge opportunity because they could have traded up for Brock Bowers and they didn't, and they didn't add anybody else there, and they brought they have numbers at that position, but Kylan Granson's in a contract year, and Mo Alley Cox, we'll see, if they end up keeping him. I think he's in the final year of his deal. They decided to keep Drew Ogletree around, but he doesn't. It's not a lot of a threat to. There's nothing blocking Jelani Woods from having that kind of big breakout. And even as we talk about there being a lot of mouths to feed in the offense, a lot of those other mouths are, it's Pearson, Mitchell playing the same position. It's Downs and Pittman playing some of the same role. That tight end spot, the way, being that player that blends the run and the pass game together, that can be such a focal point on RPOs, play action up the seam. It's something new that they just have not had it in like a consistent one body type of way. You think about like tight end screens. Shane Steichen loves those, and they were fine last year. But you have an athlete like Jelani Woods on some of those. Like Shane Steichen, why they're so excited about Shane is that like if you can actually deliver and hit a ceiling or start to show that ceiling, Shane's going to find a use for you. Shane is going to find a role that maximizes. Like it's not going to be a situation where Jelani, is doing everything right and there's just no role for him and he just doesn't like. That's not. I just don't think that's going to happen. So there is an opportunity for him to come out here and become that tight end one. I mean, it's like I think that's going to determine a lot going into next year because either like in a year from now, I think we could be talking about like, wow, they've got this explosive tight end that really diversifies this offense, or they're maybe onto another rookie there. It's just like they need something there to come together, and Jelani's in that spot. He has that opportunity, but you're right. He has to. We can only talk for so long about the theoretical version of a player. At some point, it's got to become real. I think another player that's exactly that is Nick Cross. So I know we want to pivot there for a few minutes, but like I've always been interested in Nick Cross. I talk about him a lot on here, but it's been very interesting the last day or two hearing them talk about the safety position, watching them manage it. Nick Cross got the first team reps, but they were working in Rodney Harrison at that spot, which is not his position. He's never played free safety. He was moved to linebacker because they didn't think he was, the league had kind of moved on from him as a strong safety, but they're looking at him as a free safety. That's between that and just some of the way they've discussed the free safety spot. There's a hope that Nick Cross can be that player who taps into all that athleticism that Chris Ballard traded up to get a couple years ago. But it feels more of a hope than like an expectation at this point because I think the clock's ticking on him even faster than Jelani. At least with Jelani, if he doesn't get hurt again, we could look back and say it was just a really unfortunate and weird second year, and they moved on from that training staff, and maybe that was the disconnect. It's not necessarily Jelani's fault that he missed a year to getting hurt in some weird ways, but Nick doesn't have a lot of outs if this keeps going on. For a little bit in there, it was you're too young. A little bit in there, maybe there's a disconnect between him and that coaching staff, which is mostly the same now. Maybe he had to catch up to that. Either way, at some point, we can't blame youth. We can't blame the lack of a spot for him. Like at some point, he's got to take control of that, and there's nothing blocking him either, because Rodney Thomas, he just seems more of like he's a 7th round pick who can be a special teamer and is ideally probably more of a backup in this league, can step in and be a guy you like. But like, he is not blocking Nick Cross. If Nick Cross doesn't take this position, run with it, it's because Nick Cross didn't work out. And I think we're getting close. I think we got to see it in camp. I don't even think it's something where we can just let the year play out and see how it goes, which is kind of where Jelani is. We got to see it. Jelani's got to get into the season a little bit and build chemistry and get on the field again. Nick Cross, I think, has to show it in this summer in this camp because on paper, that position looks like by far the weakest unit on this team, a team that keeps talking about wanting to go to the playoffs, expecting to go to the playoffs. Like that's a position that cannot hold them back from that if they're going to do that. So huge year ahead for Nick Cross.
Yeah, it seems like he's getting the first crack at free safety. It's another part of the draft class, though. Alec Pierce, who knows? Like, how I really don't think that it's a question of like I think everyone's looking at it as either AD Mitchell takes all of Pierce's 1,084 snaps from last year, or Pierce gets them, and I don't. That's just I don't want to use that word. That's ignoring how modern football is played. Most teams use 4 receivers, like at the very least, regularly. I think it's more likely that they end up in some way splitting those snaps he played last season in an effort to get them in the right situations. But in terms of what he's going to be in his career, if he's ever going to have a chance to move beyond being the deep threat who's kind of in that 40 catch 500-yard range, this is a huge season for him. I think if that's where he is again, I think that's probably what he gets labeled as for the rest of his. That's probably, but he's probably in that spot for the rest of his career. I keep saying that player is more valuable than people realize, but in terms of getting a second contract here, all the stuff that you want to have if you're a young player, it's a big deal.
Yeah, I think it's a little similar to Nick Cross in that this is the year that like the excuses are going to have to go away. And I think they've been pretty valid for Alec so far. He's dealt with too many quarterbacks, and almost none of them can throw down the field, which is what he was drafted for. But that's not going to be the case this year. Even if Anthony gets hurt, it will be Joe Flacco stepping in. And I think it's bought him a little bit of time, a little bit of opportunity in the fact that like he hasn't had that quarterback yet, but once he does, like his role is going to be just a couple of, a few targets a game potentially, but they're, potentially explosive down the field. You've got to make those plays. So like they're hard plays to make. I mean, we're asking you to be that explosive player, but if that's your one trick, you got to be able to do the trick. And so this is going to be a big year for him to deliver on that trick. And it's one of those things. It's a interesting needle to thread because, he may only get 3 targets a game. If he catches one of them for 40 yards, and that's a big play that sets up a scoring drive, that's a really nice game from him. When you add in other stuff he does in terms of, blocking and spacing and all of that. But if you don't deliver on those, you don't have enough else to round it out and make up for it. It's not like Michael Pittman, who may have the occasional drop, but comes back and he's going to get 12 targets and he'll do something else and convert it. Like there's just not as many opportunities because of what we talk about, the lack of opportunities for guys not named Pittman in the passing game. So it's going to become very big for Pierce to be that guy. And if he does that, that's going to be the thing that I think Mitchell will not be able to keep. Like Mitchell's tough for him. He's going to eat into his playing time. He's going to eat into the role to a point. And Mitchell may be a star, and that's going to hurt Pierce's overall opportunities. But I still think there's always going to be a role for Pierce. If he could be that explosive downfield player, they'll want that. They will want that in an offense with Anthony Richardson that's going to run play action as much as they are with teams that are going to stack the box. They need it. And so, yeah, he's got to deliver. And this is like the same thing. In a year from now, we're going to know a lot about Alec. We're either going to talk about him as, they really found a good role for him and he's opened up the explosive upside of this offense, or we're only going to be talking about AD Mitchell if that doesn't come through. So that's pretty interesting to think about just how big this camp in this season is for Alec, because the settings are there for him. And at some point, he's got to become what they drafted him to be.
I think it's also a mistake at this point to count on AD Mitchell as if he's going to be a star right away, which I've seen. And not just like on social media. I've seen other people, write about it. I think there's been like several screenshots I've seen from like NFL Network. Like, okay, yes, he's very talented. He has lots of gifts. I like him a lot. He's also a rookie receiver. who's never played it down in the NFL and has 1 year of, a lot of college production. Like, we're going to find out in training camp, but we might not find out in training camp too. There's probably going to be some times he flashes out here. That spot there, that's why I keep thinking that, like, that spot is not an either or. I think they're going to use both of them. And because what you do with rookies often, especially like rookie wide receivers, is you often don't give them the full package. You often try to hone in on the things that they do well and kind of ask them to only do that. Well, if that's what they're doing, then someone's got to do some other stuff for them too. Like, it just makes sense to me that unless AD Mitchell like really realizes all of his physical gifts right away and is a like clear-cut starting receiver, I think in that scenario, I think Josh Downs' production falls off. Like, other than that, I think the most realistic thing is a timeshare between the two of them where they use their spots to where the coaches use them to attack different areas of the defense.
Yeah, I think Josh Downs has kind of maybe spoiled fans a little bit because he produced right away, looked like that NFL player as a rookie receiver. You just have to understand how players are built differently. Josh Downs fell in the third round because he's like a slot only player. Not every team wanted that. The Colts were cool with that. They needed that. They believed in him, and he's got that like he. I guess the risk with him, I guess, would be the injury at his size, but there wasn't as much risk about can this guy play? Can he be ready to go? AD Mitchell's a totally different level where he's like he could do everything on the outside theoretically and athletically, but he fell because of questions about his rawness and how quickly he would get there. So the odds of him getting there right away as rookie are not that high. What you're hoping to see is flashes of it, and it builds and throughout late in the season. Then you're feeling good, and going into next year is when he can hopefully be more of that player. But I do fear that people are going to hold him to the standard of Josh Downs' rookie of production, and you just have to understand those are two very different players. And even though like Mitchell on the high end, his ceiling is higher than Josh Downs too, and so it's just interesting to think through.
Well, we're going to get a chance here over the next month or so to figure it out. The one practice is down. This is the first Cover-2 podcast, but training camp is just getting underway. We're going to learn a lot out here on the fields. For the IndyStar, I'm Joel Erickson. This is Nate. This has been Nate Atkins. We'll be back soon.